The Galactic Council had long been the backbone of the galaxy's order, a place where species of every size and origin came together to resolve conflicts, trade resources, and maintain peace across the stars. The Council's decisions were law, and its influence reached even the most remote corners of the galaxy. But for years, cracks had been forming beneath the surface. Bureaucracy had become the Council's primary focus, while the galaxy's most pressing issues went unaddressed. Amidst rising threats from the unknown reaches of space, the Council had failed to act. Humanity, once the galaxy's shining example of cooperation and technological advancement, had grown weary of the endless debates, the inaction, and the constant back and forth between species with competing interests. Earth, with its expansive colonies scattered across several star systems, had been a central force within the Council, offering their resources, technologies, and diplomatic skills to keep the peace. But now, the people of Earth had had enough. In a moment that would send shockwaves across the galaxy, the human representative to the Council, Ambassador Caroline Hayes, stood before the Assembly, her voice steady but filled with unmistakable conviction. The once respected diplomat was no longer the calm negotiator the Council had come to rely on. She was a human who had seen enough. After much deliberation and careful consideration, Hayes began, her words cutting through the air. The United Earth Federation has decided to withdraw from the Galactic Council. We can no longer sit idly by while corruption runs rampant, and while critical decisions are endlessly delayed. We will no longer be part of this failing institution. A murmur of disbelief spread through the assembly hall. Representatives from various species shifted uncomfortably, exchanging nervous glances. The humans had been the pillar that supported much of the Council's decisions. Their departure would leave a massive void, one that no other species could easily fill. Ambassador Hayes continued, her voice unwavering. This is not a decision born out of haste or anger, but from the simple truth that the galaxy cannot be governed by bureaucracy and stagnation any longer. We will forge our own path, one that is free from the constraints of this Council. The United Earth Federation will no longer answer to any authority but ourselves. The room fell into stunned silence. There had been whispers of discontent among human leaders, but no one had expected such an abrupt departure. The humans had always been the steady hand that balanced the Council's delicate alliances. Without them, what would remain? As Hayes ended her speech, she stepped back, her eyes scanning the faces of the Council members. Some looked betrayed, others frightened, but none could deny the gravity of the moment. The human withdrawal was not just a loss of influence. It was a declaration that the galaxy could no longer rely on the Council to safeguard its future. Outside the Grand Council chamber, the galaxy's citizens had already begun to hear the news. Rumors spread like wildfire, carried by the faster-than-light communication networks that connected distant planets. It was impossible to ignore the significance of this move. Humanity, a species that had once united the galaxy with its technological prowess, was now withdrawing from the very institution that had been created to maintain peace. Back on Earth, the decision was met with a mixture of relief and anxiety. The Federation's leadership had been preparing for this day, but the reality of it still left a lingering uncertainty. It was a bold move, one that would have far-reaching consequences, but for the first time in years, humans felt a sense of freedom. The shackles of the Council were finally gone. However, the galaxy's reaction would not be as simple. As the news spread, questions and doubts flooded the airwaves. What would this mean for interstellar trade? Could the galaxy survive without the humans' technological expertise? And perhaps most frightening of all, what would come next? The first cracks in the Council's fragile unity had been exposed, and there was no telling where this would lead. The galaxy, once united under the Council's rule, was now facing an uncertain future, and no one knew just how far the ripples of humanity's departure would reach. The moment the news of humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council hit the various star systems, the entire galaxy erupted into a frenzy. No one could have predicted how quickly the ramifications would unfold. For centuries, humanity had been a steady force in the galaxy, a reliable ally that helped maintain order, resolve conflicts, and provide technological support. Now, with their sudden departure, a vacuum of power was left that could not be ignored. Across the galaxy, communications networks buzzed with frantic discussions. Planetary governments scrambled to determine their next steps, unsure whether to align with the remaining factions of the Council or pursue their own agendas. The Council's unified front, which had long been considered invincible, was fractured beyond repair. Representatives of the various species, once united in their collective pursuit of peace, began to look out for their own survival. For some, the withdrawal of humanity meant opportunity. Warlords, once marginalized and seen as little more than nuisances, began to rise in power. They had long been outcasts in the Council's order, their brutal tactics condemned by the more diplomatic factions. But with humanity now absent, their ambitions had free rein. The most powerful warlords, such as the fearsome leader Grathak of the Torkin Horde and the cunning Lord Varys of the Krun Empire, wasted no time in mobilizing their forces, making immediate grabs for strategic planets and key trade routes. Grathak, a hulking figure known for his ruthless campaigns across the Outer Rim, saw the human departure as his golden moment. His warships, large and imposing, began raiding deep into neutral space, seizing critical resources and systems with terrifying efficiency. Planets that had long been untouched by conflict suddenly found themselves under siege. His tactics were swift, merciless, and calculated. As his power grew, he began to attract a following of smaller factions, all eager to stake their claim in the newly chaotic galaxy. Meanwhile, Lord Varys of the Krun Empire, a more subtle but equally dangerous leader, began to manipulate the shifting alliances in the Council's absence. Varys was a master of politics, and while many species saw the warlords as threats, he viewed them as tools to expand his empire. By playing on the fear and desperation of weaker factions, he began brokering deals, offering protection in exchange for loyalty. Soon, entire sectors of the galaxy found themselves under Krun influence, their leaders too afraid to resist. The smaller species, those who had always relied on the Council for protection, were now in turmoil. Without the guiding hand of humanity, they found themselves caught in the crossfire. Some, like the peaceful Therans of the Rillic cluster, tried to remain neutral, hoping that the chaos would eventually settle. But others, such as the fierce Xantari from the edge of the galaxy, saw the turmoil as a sign to assert their dominance. The Xantari, known for their formidable warriors, began expanding their borders, striking first at the fringes of warlord territories and claiming new systems. Back on Earth, the Federation's leadership watched all of this unfold with a quiet, determined resolve. They had known that this chaos was inevitable, but the humans had a plan, one they had carefully prepared for years. As the galaxy's power structures began to fracture, humanity knew that their next move would be crucial. But for now, they maintained their silence, watching the scramble unfold from the sidelines. The biggest question on everyone's mind was this: who would rise to power in the galaxy now that humanity had withdrawn? Would the warlords take over, plunging the galaxy into an age of brutality and fear? Or would something else emerge from the chaos? In every corner of the galaxy, people were starting to realize the same truth. The old order was gone, and a new era had begun. The scramble for control had only just started, and no one knew who would emerge victorious in the end. But one thing was certain: the galaxy would never be the same again. While the galaxy erupted into chaos, humanity remained strangely calm. From their vast, secure colonies across the stars, Earth's leadership had already anticipated the fallout of their departure from the Galactic Council. For years, behind closed doors and away from the prying eyes of other species, they had been quietly preparing for this moment. The Federation knew that their decision would send shockwaves across the galaxy, but they also knew it would create an opportunity, one that, if seized correctly, would allow humanity to rise in ways no one had ever imagined. Humanity's leaders, now in full control of their destiny, immediately began executing their plan, the details of which had been years in the making. The human government set to work contacting their closest allies among the smaller independent species, those who had long felt marginalized by the Council's bureaucracy and who, like humanity, had grown tired of the old ways. These were the species that had always admired humanity's resolve. And now, with the galaxy in turmoil, they saw the opportunity to form a new kind of alliance. These new allies came from the Outer Rim, species that had been ignored or oppressed under the Council's rule. The strong, proud Phyrexians, a race of fierce, honorable warriors. The Solori, a species known for their advanced medical technologies. And the ever-crafty Viran, a group of highly intelligent engineers. Each of these species, previously on the fringes of galactic politics, now found themselves listening closely to human diplomats, eager to form a bond that could protect them from the chaos sweeping the galaxy. Behind the scenes, humanity's military also sprang into action. The Federation's fleet, once under the purview of the Council's collective defense force, now operated as an independent unit, free to defend human interests without restraint. But it wasn't just the military might that humanity was offering. Humans had something far more valuable to offer these fledgling alliances: technology. Humanity's scientific advancements were unmatched in the galaxy. While many species had been bogged down in their own struggles, humanity had continued to push the boundaries of what was possible. Their ships were faster, their weapons more efficient, and their medical technologies were light years ahead of most of the galaxy. To the smaller species, this technological advantage was a lifeline, a tool that could ensure their survival in the coming storm. Humans didn't just offer them military protection. They offered a way to thrive in a galaxy that seemed increasingly uncertain. The new alliances were not built on promises of dominance or greed, but on a shared desire for autonomy and security. These species, now under humanity's umbrella, began working together, exchanging resources, knowledge, and support in ways that had never been possible under the rigid Council. Where once there had been distrust and division, now there was a quiet unity, a unity that was slowly but surely growing in strength. On Earth, the Federation's leadership watched the events unfold with measured anticipation. They knew that the galaxy was still teetering on the edge of disaster. The warlords were gaining ground, and the Council was crumbling, but they also knew that humanity had made the right choice. By stepping away from the chaos of the old order, they had created the space to build something new, something that would shape the galaxy's future. While other factions scrambled for control, humanity's quiet strategy was already taking root. They were not rushing into open conflict, but instead biding their time, securing allies, and preparing for the eventual confrontation. They knew that the warlords were a growing threat, and that soon enough, the time would come to take action. But for now, they were content to let the galaxy's other players make their moves, while humanity quietly built the foundation for its next steps. In the calm, cold space of the galaxy, humanity was laying the groundwork for a new order, one that would, in time, reshape the entire galaxy. And while many across the stars might have believed humanity's departure was a retreat, the truth was far different. Humanity was no longer bound by the limitations of the old system. They had the freedom to rise, and in the shadows, they were already plotting their next move. As humanity quietly consolidated its power, the galaxy's other factions were not idle. In the void left by the Galactic Council's collapse, the warlords saw an opportunity to seize control, and they did not hesitate to act. The initial shock of humanity's departure quickly gave way to a ruthless scramble for dominance, and those who had long lived on the outskirts of galactic politics now had the chance to rewrite the rules. Grathak, leader of the Torcan Horde, was one of the first to move. A towering figure known for his brutal, decisive tactics, Grathak had long been a thorn in the side of the Galactic Council. His empire, built on violence and intimidation, was one of the most feared in the galaxy. With the collapse of the Council, Grathak wasted no time in expanding his reach, swiftly conquering key trade routes and taking over systems that were once too well defended for his forces to even consider. The Torkin Horde's massive warships, reinforced by an army of loyal soldiers, began striking at planets in the Outer Rim, crushing resistance with overwhelming force. The speed of his conquests stunned the galaxy. Whole systems that had been at peace for centuries now found themselves under the brutal control of Grathak's forces, and with no council to intervene, the galaxy could do little more than watch as the warlord's empire expanded. Planets that resisted were swiftly obliterated, their populations either enslaved or massacred, sending a clear message: resistance would not be tolerated. Not far behind Grathak was Lord Varys of the Krone Empire, a calculating leader known for his political prowess and subtlety. Unlike Grathak, who relied on sheer military might, Varys used cunning diplomacy to carve out his influence. He began courting the weaker factions in the galaxy, offering protection in exchange for loyalty. His promises of stability were tempting, especially for those species whose worlds were now in danger of being overrun by the warlords. Varys was a master manipulator, weaving a complex web of alliances and betrayals. He knew that while Grathak's raw strength was powerful, it was his own strategic mind that would ultimately prove more dangerous. Lord Varys' influence spread quickly as he offered his protection to systems that had nowhere else to turn. At first, the smaller planets welcomed his aid, desperate for any form of security in a galaxy descending into chaos. But soon, they realized the true cost of his protection: subjugation. Varys didn't just offer safety. He demanded loyalty, allegiance, and resources. Those who refused were swiftly crushed, their governments replaced with Krone puppets. The Krone Empire was growing, and soon, Varys' network of control spanned multiple star systems. Other warlords were quick to follow suit, carving up the galaxy into territories based on their strengths and ambitions. Zalrith, the vicious pirate lord of the Almaris sector, began raiding neutral zones, plundering ships and planets alike. His marauding fleet became a constant presence on the fringes, striking fear into the hearts of traders and civilians. Meanwhile, smaller factions, once content to remain neutral, started falling under the sway of these warlords. The promise of power and resources was too tempting to resist. The galaxy, once united under the Council's fragile peace, was now a patchwork of ruthless empires, each vying for supremacy. For those watching from the sidelines, the rise of the warlords was a terrifying sight. The galaxy had never known this level of lawlessness. Systems that had once been interconnected by peaceful trade routes and diplomatic ties now found themselves isolated, vulnerable, and at the mercy of these new powers. The warlords' influence grew with each passing day, and the question on everyone's mind was simple: would the galaxy ever know peace again? The chaos was palpable, and the fear of a new dark age loomed large. The brutal rise of the warlords was unstoppable, and it was clear that their hunger for power would not be easily satisfied. Their actions were the first signs of a galaxy on the brink, and only one question remained: who would emerge victorious in this new struggle for the stars? The galaxy trembled as the warlords' reign of terror expanded across star systems. Planets that had once lived in relative peace under the governance of the Galactic Council now found themselves under the iron fist of these ruthless leaders. Grathak's Torkin Horde, Varys' Krone Empire, and the smaller pirate factions ruled with brutality and fear, their armies growing stronger with each new world they conquered. It seemed as though nothing could stop their unchecked rise. But humanity, carefully observing the galaxy's descent into chaos, was not idle. The Federation had been planning for this very moment. While the warlords were quick to seize territory, humanity had been quietly preparing a counteroffensive, gathering their forces, fortifying their alliances, and studying the movements of the enemy. It was not a strategy born out of desperation, but of calculated precision. The time for passive observation had ended. The first strike came unexpectedly, delivered with the speed and precision that only humans could execute. It began on the Outer Rim, where the Torkin Horde had expanded rapidly, devastating neutral worlds and laying waste to defenseless colonies. Grathak, confident in his overwhelming strength, had left many of his territories poorly defended, thinking that no force would dare challenge him. It was this arrogance that humanity capitalized on. Under the command of Admiral Sophia Grant, the United Earth Federation's fleet launched a series of well-coordinated, lightning-fast strikes against Grathak's most vulnerable holdings. Using their superior intelligence and technological advancements, humanity targeted key supply lines and strategically important planets that were critical to the Torkin Horde's military machine. The Federation's ships, equipped with advanced cloaking technology and rapid response tactics, hit swiftly and without warning, disabling Grathak's fleet before it could even mount a proper defense. The assault was devastating. Entire fleets of Torkin warships were wiped out in moments, their commanders unable to react in time. Key bases on conquered planets were taken by surprise, falling into human hands with minimal resistance. Grathak, enraged by the loss of so much territory, quickly ordered a counterattack, but it was already too late. Humanity had already retreated into the shadows, leaving behind a crippled warlord and a shattered fleet. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the Federation, once considered an absent player in the galactic struggle, delivered the first blow to the warlords. It wasn't just the military defeat of Grathak that shocked the galaxy. It was the sheer efficiency of the operation. The humans had made it look effortless, a perfect execution of strategy and technology. But the humans weren't finished. The second phase of their strategy involved striking at Varys' Krun Empire, where the political mastermind had been methodically expanding his reach. While Grathak relied on sheer strength, Varys was known for his ability to turn alliances to his advantage. The Federation knew that a direct assault on Varys' territories would not be enough. Instead, they focused on sowing dissent within his empire, targeting the systems that were most vulnerable to internal unrest. Human operatives, working in the shadows, began to infiltrate key systems under Varys' control, spreading misinformation, creating unrest, and causing divisions among his ranks. The Krun Empire, despite its impressive military might, began to see fractures within its leadership. While Varys focused on consolidating his power, his forces were caught off guard by the mounting internal strife. The Federation's agents had once again proven that humanity's strength was not just in its weapons, but in its ability to outthink and outmaneuver its enemies. The first strike was a success, but it was only the beginning. The warlords, now reeling from the Federation's sudden and overwhelming offensive, were forced to reconsider their next steps. They had underestimated humanity, believing them to be weakened by their departure from the Council. But the humans had shown that they were anything but powerless. Their strategic brilliance, advanced technology, and unyielding determination had delivered the galaxy's first true defeat to the rising tide of warlords. The galaxy had been set on a new course. The balance of power had shifted, and it was clear that humanity, once thought to be retreating into isolation, was now the galaxy's most dangerous player. And the warlords, now wounded and in disarray, would soon realize that the fight for control of the galaxy was far from over. Humanity had just begun to make its mark. The shockwaves from humanity's sudden and successful offensive reverberated throughout the galaxy. The Torkin Horde had been dealt a significant blow, and the Krun Empire, once considered the most calculated and politically adept of the warlord factions, was grappling with internal divisions and turmoil. For the first time in years, the warlords had been made to bleed, their unchecked rise brought to a sudden halt by the very force they had underestimated. But the warlords were not the only players in this new chaotic galaxy. As the Federation's victories began to spread, something else was stirring. A resistance, born not from the desire to wage war, but from the growing realization that the galaxy could not survive under the rule of the warlords. It started small, with isolated pockets of civilians and planetary militias banding together, but it grew quickly, fueled by the promise of a future free from the tyranny of warlords. The first signs of this resistance were seen on the planet Azoth, once a thriving trade world now under the brutal control of Grathak's Torcan horde. The planet's people, who had long been oppressed by the warlord's forces, found themselves in the unique position of being liberated by the United Earth Federation. In the wake of the Federation's strike, many former resistance groups, those who had fought a losing battle against the horde, found new hope. They began to organize, rallying together under the banner of freedom and self-governance. It wasn't just the humans who were lending their support. Many of the smaller species that had once been on the fringes of galactic politics, those who had previously allied with humanity in secret, now joined the resistance openly. The Phyrexian warriors, with their unparalleled combat prowess, added their strength to the fight. The Essilori, with their advanced medical technologies, began setting up field hospitals, healing the wounded and ensuring that the resistance could continue to operate. Even the Viren engineers, known for their brilliance and technology, began supplying the resistance with innovative weapons and defense systems. The warlords, already reeling from humanity's strikes, now found themselves facing a growing insurgency, a force composed of ordinary civilians, planetary militias, and former soldiers, all united by the desire to break free from tyranny. This resistance, while still small, was becoming more organized and more effective by the day. It was clear that the galaxy's people were tired of living under the thumb of the warlords, and they were ready to fight for their freedom. The Federation, while continuing its covert operations, saw the potential in this burgeoning resistance. Humanity's leadership knew that they could not win this war alone. The galaxy's people had to be given the opportunity to fight back, to take control of their own destiny. The Federation began to coordinate with the resistance, providing them with training, intelligence, and resources to strengthen their efforts. It was a calculated decision, but one that made perfect sense. A united front, with the galaxy's people standing together, would be far more effective than a Federation-led campaign alone. Meanwhile, the warlords, desperate to reclaim control, began to lash out even more violently. Grathak, embittered by his earlier defeat, unleashed his fury on the resistance, crushing entire cities and leaving nothing but devastation in his wake. But the harder the warlords pushed, the stronger the resistance became. Each act of oppression, each victory for the warlords, only galvanized the people of the galaxy further. Resistance movements flared up across the stars, from the outer rim to the core systems, and the warlords found themselves unable to contain the fires of rebellion. As the resistance grew, it began to take on a life of its own. What started as a small spark of hope was now a burning fire, spreading across the galaxy, threatening to engulf the warlords' empires. The Federation watched, knowing that their next move would be crucial. With the warlords divided and the resistance gaining strength, it was only a matter of time before the next stage of the conflict would begin. The galaxy was no longer the realm of unchecked power held by a few. Its future now rested in the hands of its people. The balance had shifted once again. The warlords had started to lose their grip, and the resistance had begun its march toward freedom. The next battle would determine whether the galaxy would continue to fall under tyranny, or if it would rise to a new era of hope and independence. As the galaxy's resistance continued to gain momentum, the warlords found themselves increasingly on the defensive. Their once unstoppable rise was now met with a persistent, well-coordinated pushback from both the Federation and the growing network of rebel factions. The warlords' ability to strike fear into the hearts of the galaxy's citizens was weakening. Each victory for the resistance emboldened those who had once been too afraid to rise up. Now, more than ever, the galaxy was on the edge of a monumental shift. The tipping point came when the resistance, bolstered by Federation support, launched a massive coordinated strike on one of Grathak's most fortified strongholds, the planet Drathar, located at the heart of the Torcan Horde's territory. The stronghold was heavily defended, a symbol of Grathak's unyielding power, and it was considered an impregnable fortress. But the Federation's intelligence network had pinpointed a vulnerability, a weakness in Grathak's strategic defenses that had been overlooked in his arrogance. The operation was spearheaded by a combined force of Federation military ships, resistance fighters, and local militias. It was a gamble, one that could either shatter the Turkan horde's hold on the galaxy or backfire, giving Grathak the chance to retaliate in full force. The stakes could not have been higher. The goal was simple: cripple Grathak's ability to wage war on the galaxy by destroying his military infrastructure and severing his supply lines. But the execution was anything but simple. Admiral Sophia Grant led the Federation fleet in a lightning-fast assault on Drathar's orbital defenses. With precision timing, Federation warships slipped past Grathak's outer defenses, disabling key satellites and communication networks. Meanwhile, resistance forces on the planet itself launched a series of guerrilla attacks on ground installations, cutting off supply routes and sabotaging key military assets. The battle was brutal and unforgiving. The Turkan horde fought with ferocity, unwilling to let their stronghold fall without a blood-soaked battle. Grathak himself was said to be leading the charge, directing his forces with the ruthless efficiency that had made him a legend. But even he could not deny the overwhelming force of the coordinated assault. One by one, Grathak's ships were brought down, and his defensive positions on the planet were dismantled. The warlord's once unbreakable fortress began to crumble under the combined might of the Federation and the Resistance. For the first time, the warlords were on the back foot. Grathak's forces were in disarray, their morale shattered by the unexpected blow. On Drathar, the Resistance fighters pushed forward, taking control of key cities and forcing Grathak's remaining forces into retreat. It was a humiliating defeat for the Turkan horde, one that sent ripples through the entire galaxy. The news of Drathar's fall spread like wildfire, carried through the galaxy's communication channels. The Resistance had done what many thought was impossible: taken down one of the most feared warlords in the galaxy. It was a moment of hope for the people of the galaxy, a clear signal that the tide had turned. But it was also a moment of reckoning for the warlords. Grathak's empire, once a dominant force, was now fractured and vulnerable. His allies, sensing weakness, began to pull away, questioning whether he could truly hold his empire together. In the wake of Drathar's fall, the galaxy's political landscape began to shift. Systems that had once bowed to the warlords began to reconsider their loyalties. Formerly neutral planets, once caught between the warring factions, began to join the Resistance in droves. The balance of power was slowly but surely slipping from the warlords' grasp. But the warlords were not going down without a fight. Grathak, humiliated and angry, was already regrouping, vowing vengeance on those who had dared to strike at his heart. And Lord Varys, too, was watching closely, realizing that the Federation and its allies were more formidable than he had initially believed. The warlords would not simply disappear, they would retaliate, and the galaxy's next phase of conflict was about to begin. The Resistance had scored a major victory, but the war was far from over. The galaxy was in turmoil, and now more than ever, it would need leaders with the strength and resolve to bring the conflict to its final, decisive conclusion. Who would emerge victorious in the end? The warlords, clinging to their empires, or the galaxy's people, rising up to reclaim their future? The final battle was drawing near, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The fall of Drathar was a seismic event, one that signaled the beginning of the end for the warlords. The once unimaginable defeat of Grathak sent shockwaves across the galaxy, shattering the illusion of their invincibility. Systems and planets that had long been under the thumb of these tyrants began to reconsider their allegiances. The Resistance, now emboldened by their victory, rallied under the banner of liberation, while the Federation's support for the cause grew stronger. But the warlords were far from finished. Grathak, his pride wounded, retreated to the heart of his remaining strongholds, regrouping and consolidating his forces. He called upon his loyal allies, the remnants of his Turkan horde, to rally behind him for one final push. The other warlords, seeing the tide shift, quickly began to reinforce their territories and gather their forces. Lord Varys, ever the strategist, saw the vulnerability created by Grathak's loss and decided to make his move. The Kroon Empire, while still grappling with internal strife, knew that their survival depended on their ability to crush the resistance before it could gain even more ground. For the first time in the war, the warlords knew that they were facing a real threat, not from humanity alone, but from a united galaxy of species ready to fight for their freedom. The final battle was coming, and it would be the galaxy's most intense conflict to date. A final reckoning was on the horizon, one that would decide the fate of the galaxy forever. The Federation, in coordination with the Resistance, began planning their final strike, an all-out assault on the warlord strongholds that would crush their ability to continue the war. Intelligence gathered over months of covert operations pointed to a crucial target: the warlords' unified command center, located on the remote planet of Kethar. It was a fortress surrounded by layers of security and defense, where the leaders of the Turkan Horde, the Kroon Empire, and the pirate factions had come together to plan their final moves. The Federation knew this would be their most dangerous operation yet. To succeed, they would need to disable the warlords' communication systems, cut off their ability to coordinate, and dismantle their military command in one decisive strike. But the risk was immense. Failure would result in the destruction of the Resistance, and possibly even the collapse of the Federation itself. Admiral Sophia Grant, now regarded as one of the galaxy's greatest military minds, led the charge. Her fleet, joined by forces from the Resistance and their new allies, prepared for the largest battle in galactic history. The final plan was set into motion. Resistance forces would infiltrate Kethar's surface and disable key defenses, while the Federation fleet would launch a two-pronged attack, one to draw the warlords' fleets into open space, and another to strike directly at the command center. The battle on Kethar was fierce. As Federation and Resistance forces clashed with the warlords' elite soldiers, the atmosphere was thick with chaos and gunfire. The warlords, desperate to protect their last stronghold, fought with everything they had left, but they were outmatched. Grathak, furious and vengeful, led his forces into the fray with unbridled rage. But the Resistance, galvanized by the success of their previous victories, fought with a fierce determination that had been fueled by years of oppression. In space, the Federation fleet clashed with the remaining warlord forces in a battle that stretched across the stars. Explosions filled the void as ships exchanged fire, their shields flickering under the intensity of the assault. The Federation's superior tactics and technology began to turn the tide, as Grathak's fleet struggled to keep up. The final push came when a small Federation strike team, led by Admiral Grant herself, breached Kethar's outer defenses and successfully infiltrated the command center. With the warlords' leadership disbanded and their communication systems disabled, the battle was all but won. As the dust settled on the battlefield, the warlords' once mighty forces were in disarray. Grathak, defeated and cornered, was captured by Federation forces, his reign of terror finally brought to an end. Lord Varys, realizing the inevitable, attempted to flee but was pursued and forced to surrender. The pirate factions, leaderless and scattered, were quickly neutralized. The galaxy's warlords had been vanquished, their empires shattered. The victory was not without sacrifice. The Federation and Resistance forces had suffered heavy losses, but the cost was worth it. The galaxy, which had once been on the brink of a new dark age, now had a chance at peace. The people of the galaxy, united for the first time in years, celebrated their hard-won freedom. Humanity, which had sparked the first strike and led the charge against the warlords, now stood as a beacon of hope and resilience. The final reckoning was over, but the work of rebuilding the galaxy had only just begun. With the warlords defeated and their empires in ruins, the galaxy faced a new chapter, one where the people, not the tyrants, would shape their future. And humanity, once seen as weak and isolated, had proven to be the galaxy's greatest hope. The stars were now theirs to reclaim.